Hey, how you doing? It's been a while, hasn't it? Also, if you can hear the fan going off at all in the background, I'm very sorry. It's currently summer here in Australia, so it's very, very hot, and the fan is the only way I have of making sure nothing in my room melts. Also, if I sound like I'm about to cough in any of the audio, or I sound like I've just coughed, or I sound really, really raspy, it's because all of the bushfires in Australia have actually caused an allergic reaction for me, and I'm now temporarily asthmatic until the smoke clears. And on top of that, I also have a flu. So I've been coughing non-stop for almost a week and a half, and my throat is destroyed. So I've been off YouTube for quite a while now, just focusing on Instagram and my art and my animation and going to university and stuff like that. And between from my last upload and where I am now, I've had a lot of experiences in both university and just personal experience in general. And that's the experience of working with long-term projects. I put long-term projects in quotes because in university, the projects aren't exactly long-term. You get about 14 weeks to do it, so you get one semester to do it. I'm talking long-term projects as in passion projects, stuff that you've been honing for years and so on and so forth. Now, one thing that I've learned in the experience of doing these long-term projects or these passion projects is planning. Planning. If you follow me for a while, I used to have this passion project on the side called Noble Blood. And I've taken a step back from it. I'm not currently working on it at the moment because there was just no planning involved. I've been working on it since 2013, but from 2013 to the end of 2018, none of that was editing. It was all just writing stuff, taking new ideas, saying yes to every single idea instead of deciding whether or not it's going to impact the story or the world or the characters in a way that I want it to or not. So there was just no planning, there was no foundation. I was just tacking on anything and everything because I was so excited to work on something that I didn't actually realize that what I was doing wasn't building a solid foundation for the story to build and grow and actually be engaging and interesting. And so when I took a step back from the project, I realized that I couldn't make heads or tails of what was going on. There was too much going on world building wise, but there wasn't enough going on character development wise. There was so much lore that actually contradicted each other because I had said yes to every exciting idea that came to mind. And it was very difficult for me to explain the plot at that point. Like, there were certain things that I just could not explain to people and I couldn't rationalize why they were in the story. And so whenever I tried to pick it apart or rebuild it or make something new of it, it would always fall apart. And that's because the foundation for the story wasn't there. Now, Noble Blood isn't cancelled or anything. I am going to bring it back eventually, but because that foundation is so weak, it needs to be completely deconstructed and rebuilt from the ground up, and that's something I'm not ready for just yet, just because there's way too much going on, and I really need to pick and choose what's going to happen and what I'm going to throw away. So for now, it's on the back burner, and I'm currently working on something else. So this new thing I'm working on is called Forget Me Not. I don't want to focus on the plot too much in this video because it's not really relevant to the video itself, but if you follow me on Instagram, you'll have seen the characters and their motivations and have a general idea of what's going on. The character I'm painting in this video right now is actually named Haley. She's one of the main characters. She's super mega cute. I hope you like her. Anyway, back on topic. So basically, as I'm writing and developing Forget Me Not, I'm taking everything that I had learnt from when I was working on Noble Blood initially and changing my practices and using those new practices for Forget Me Not. So one of the main things I did that is very fundamental for working on a long-term project is basic plot points. You need to know what you want to happen and when you want it to happen, and just have a general, it doesn't have to be very strong, but just a general structure of how you want the story to play out. Another thing that I'm doing with Forget Me Not is editorial rounds. We're currently almost finished with the first draft of the script for the entire series, or the first part of the entire series. And I say first draft because unlike Noble Blood, this script is going to go through 2, possibly even 3 editorial rounds before we get into actual animation. And while we're on the topic of animation, something that I didn't do for Noble Blood but would have helped immensely, and what I am going to do for Forget Me Not, is I'm going to do storyboards. This is really only relevant if you're doing comics or animation or animatics or anything like that. Storyboards are very important. It just gives you a general idea of what's going to be where, how things are going to happen, how the layout is going to be. For comics, it's not so much a storyboard, it's more just thumbnailing pages, but it's generally the same idea. And those storyboards will be going through their own editorial phase. So the first draft is never going to be the final draft in Forget-Me-Not, is basically what I'm saying, and is very, very important for you to keep in mind when you're working on your own long-term projects. The first draft can never be the final draft. Another thing that you'll want to keep in mind is to not just say yes to every cool idea that you or someone else has that brings some sort of value to the story, because that value could end up being negative and detrimental to the story. You really want to be able to pick and choose what ideas you're going to take and which ones are probably best for something else. And if you have that structure of your solid plot points from earlier, it'll be a lot easier to pick and choose which ideas are good for this project and which ones you should probably save for something else. Another thing that'll help you pick and choose ideas and make sure that your story stays clear is to make sure that you have an extremely clear end goal. What is the end scene? How do you want the audience to feel? What do you want them to take from it? What is the be-all, end-all for your story? And once you have that really clear, it's almost too easy to pick and choose which ideas are good for this project and which ones you should use for either something else or just completely abandon. Now, if you really want your long-term project to take off or be remembered or have it really, really stick with people, a good thing to do is to have a library of other similar stories and similar mediums that you can look on for reference. Like, for example, for Forget-Me-Not, it is a zombie story. So I look at things like Zombieland, I look at things like School Live, I look at things like The Walking Dead, which is the main influence for Forget-Me-Not. And I look at all of these things and I take elements that I like from each and every one of them and try to blend them into something that makes it its own idea, that makes it its own special thing. For example, I really, really like the humor in Zombieland. I also really, really like the parallel in School Life, where she thinks everything is normal, but it actually isn't. And my absolute favorite part of the Walking Dead Telltale video game, and again, the main reason I wrote Forget-Me-Not in the first place, is how an apocalypse can really bring out the worst in people and how people are monsters too. That's just a brief summary of my visual library for Forget-Me-Not. I also have an audio playlist, which I highly recommend, making a music playlist for the general vibe you want for parts of your story. But just make sure that you're taking from multiple places. You're not just taking from one or two, because if you limit the amount of ideas that you have and the amount of influence you take from certain things, it can come off less as influence and more as if you are stealing their ideas or you are trying to clone what they have done. And nobody wants their own original long-term project to feel like a clone of somebody else's. A rip-off steals from one story, a great storyteller steals from many. Just remember that. While we're on the topic of taking ideas from other people and implementing them into your own story, I want to make it very clear, and this is something that people really need to get into their heads right now, nothing is original anymore. I'll use Forget-Me-Not as an example. Forget-Me-Not is a zombie drama. There's countless zombie dramas out there. Currently, the only two that come to mind are The Walking Dead and that one Netflix one. I forget what it is called, but basically it's a bunch of kids in a zombie apocalypse where the disease or the infection has only affected the adults, so all the survivors are kids. But again, zombie dramas have been done countless times before, and that concept alone is not original. What makes a story unique and what makes it stand out from others is the characters you create, the story elements you add into it, how relatable and realistic the characters feel, and so on and so forth. For example, I'll talk about Hayley a little bit because she's the main feature of the speed paint. Hayley is very energetic and outgoing, and she always speaks her mind, and that's what makes her desirable to people, but it was also the downfall of her character, so to speak. She says and does a lot of things that she can't take back, and those things really stick with her, and because she can't take them back, she tries to compensate in other ways by being overly nice or overly friendly, and just trying to push the things that she has said and done to the back of her mind because she doesn't want to think about it and she doesn't want to remember how much of a bad person she is or how much of a bad person she's perceived to be. Again, nothing is original these days, so that concept has been done countless times before. But when you take that and you add it to Caden's character, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but I might go into a bit later, and you add the zombie element to it and the whole people can be monsters too thing that I want to go for, and you've got something that, while still not completely original, really sticks out and really makes it its own thing, at least in my opinion. Another thing that I really want to quickly touch on while we're talking about long-term projects is motivation versus discipline. Motivation and discipline are two very different things when it comes to long-term projects, and just because you have the motivation to do something doesn't mean that you actually have the discipline to continue doing it as time goes on. Motivation is something that comes and goes, it fades, and what you're motivated to do can change every other week. And if you only work on your long-term project when you're motivated to do it, it's going to take a really long time for this project to get its feet off the ground, and it may not even get its feet off the ground at all. It's really, really important that once you have the fundamentals for an idea and you've had the motivation to start it, that you have the discipline to follow through with it and make sure that the idea actually follows its way through and gets finished. Now, if your long-term project is in fact a passion project, one thing that I want to make really, really clear, and it's very unfortunate and it's very saddening, but it is the truth, there is a very high chance, almost a certainty, that you're not going to be making much, if any, money off of this project. And that could be really demotivating for people who really want to tell their stories for the sake of people hearing them, for the sake of popularity, for the sake of making their name be known. And if that is the main reason you're telling your stories, then as harsh as it sounds, you might want to reconsider, because there's so many other reasons to work on a long-term project and get your story out there aside from making bank, which you probably won't be able to do unless you already have a really, really large audience and a really large backing behind you. I know in order to stay disciplined to work on a story, you need to have some sort of underlying motivation. Even if you can't necessarily directly feel it, there has to be an underlying motivation. And for some people, that underlying motivation is making money off of their story, or making themselves be known, and making their story the riches part of their rags to riches life. But in order to save yourself from getting hurt in the long run, I highly recommend you find something else to get attached to. Like for me personally, I know that if I continue to work on this as an indie animator like I currently am, I'm probably not going to make any money off of Forget Me Not. But I want to work on it anyway because it is a story that is very, very personal to me and has a lot of real life events worked into it. And it's sort of therapeutic for me to work on it and develop the story and the characters more. It's also a really good addition to my portfolio because I am in fact an animator. I need work to show off to prove that I can animate, I can storyboard, I can use the golden ratio and change perspective of things and make things look fun and interesting and show the life in the movement. And so for me, that is the main underlying motivation when working on Forget Me Not. Yes, the monetary value is still something that I would really enjoy, but I've come to terms with accepting that that's probably not going to be the case, and I'm really lucky if I even get a penny out of this project. Of course, motivation versus discipline is a much more serious thing if you're doing art, comics, storytelling, or animation as your career, because you can't just do your job whenever you feel like it. You have to do it a certain amount of hours every day, otherwise you're not going to get paid. Your bills aren't going to be able to get paid, you won't be able to go out, you won't be able to take care of yourself. As a hobbyist, this motivation versus discipline thing isn't exactly as serious, but at the same time, if you want your ideas to go somewhere and if you want to really finish this passion project and make sure that you don't have just a bunch of failed projects or rough ideas that never got their feet off the ground, you really need to focus on teaching yourself discipline and not just working when you're motivated. Another kind of relevant thing that I want to touch on is time management. You'll see time and time again that people say that they have a lot of ideas that they want to work on, or they want to write a book, or they want to write a song, or something like that, and they say that they just don't have the time to start, or they don't have the time to follow through with it. If it's something you're really, really passionate about, you will make the time to do it. I'm currently a full-time uni student, I have a part-time job, I have a healthy, sustainable relationship with my boyfriend, and on top of this, I still always find time to come back to whatever project I'm working on at the time. Animation and storytelling is something that I've been really, really passionate about since as long as I can remember. not particularly animation. I've been into storytelling for as long as I can remember. Animation came around 2011-ish, maybe 2010. But because it's something that I have such a strong passion for, and I have had this passion for such a long time, it doesn't matter what comes up in my life. Like, I could have a family member get 3 types of cancer. I could have family issues at home. I could have an issue with my relationship. I will still make time to sort out those things and then make sure that I have extra time to go back to my story. Now, that being said, you don't want to give up time on other things in order to work on your story. Like, you may want to make time to work on your story, but you still need time to eat, you still need time to sleep, you still need time to clean yourself, and basic necessities like that. I'm not suggesting you cut anything out of your life. I am just saying that you should reshuffle things and make sure that you have time to do everything that you want to do, including this story if it's something that you're really passionate about. Another quick thing I just want to mention in this category, if you live with people, do not prioritize your story to a point where they are picking up the slack for you. They're taking extra shifts at work. They're doing your part of the house cleaning. They're cooking for you. They're making sure you eat and stuff like that. You are your own responsibility. And yes, you want to get this project done. And yes, you do need to make time for it. But you don't want the time that you're pushing aside to work on this project to make yourself an inconvenience for other people. You need to be courteous. You still need to get everything that you need to get done. And you need to find that time to squish the story in. Don't make people look after you. Another thing about long-term projects that I actually don't see a lot of people talking about right now is the expenses part of it. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're doing something creative, like if you're writing a song, writing a book, illustrating a book, or anything along those lines, there's going to be some sort of expense that comes along. I know for book publishing, you need to pay a publishing fee, you need to pay an editorial fee, all sorts of things like that. And then you only get paid the royalties if you get published through a publisher and if you don't self-publish. For songwriting or just instrumentals in the background, you'll need to pay musicians, you'll need to pay a composer. If you want to sing the song but you don't necessarily know how to write a song, you may have to hire someone to write the song, and that is an extra cost. And if you're like me and you're doing animation for a long-term project, there's voice actors to pay for, there's storyboard artists to pay for if you're not comfortable doing everything yourself. There's also guest animators to pay for. That's also optional. I'm probably going to be paying for extra animators just because I already have a team of voice actors and storyboard artists that are willing to do it for free for now. Don't worry, I am paying them. Eventually, when this project really gets its feet off the ground, we're going to get a Kickstarter, but that's irrelevant right now. The main point I'm trying to make is that if you are trying to do a long-term project in the creative field, you really need to do your research, make sure you have the funds to do so, and if you don't, try and figure out how you can get the funds to do so. Another thing is to shop around, so to speak. Make sure you're getting different prices from different companies depending on what it is you want, and just make sure you're not getting scammed or ripped off. Another important thing to do is if they have a review list, to read the reviews. If you know people who have worked with them in the past, or they have a list of people they've worked with in the past, try and ask them how their experience was, and just make sure that the person you end up working with is trustworthy, is going to be kind to you, and isn't ripping you off. I think that's really all I can think of at the moment. This wasn't scripted, this is just me bullet pointing things that I've learnt from starting uni and working on these 14-week projects and the failure that was Noble Blood and now working on Forget Me Not. Again, if you want to see more Forget Me Not stuff, follow me on Instagram. I really hope this video has helped someone in terms of working on long-term projects, because long-term projects can be really draining, and this is stuff that I didn't know when I was working on Noble Blood, and because of that I've had to abandon it. And even though I abandoned it for good reason, it still really breaks my heart that I had to do that, and I had to take such a step back so that I could eventually come back to it and rebuild something out of all of these crumbled bits and pieces that I have left. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. I'm going to try uploading at least semi-regularly in 2020, just because I want something to come on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to be graduating in February and starting my full-time job. And although I will have Forget Me Not on the side as my passion project and my long-term project, I do want to have something else to do on the side instead of just animating or just writing or just editing. I really want to sort of expand what I do and like put myself out there a little bit more, because currently I'm only on Instagram. So hopefully I can stick to that more regular uploading schedule. We'll see how we go. If yes, brilliant. If not, cool, whatever, it's fine, I guess. But yeah, I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye, stay toasty.